Chapter 6, California, 1991. Things started in California as though I had taken an extended vacation. Paris persuaded Aunt Ernestine to allow JR to stay with them temporarily. Therefore, I enrolled him in the elementary school nearby. This particular school was a year-round school that operated on a multi-track. JR was assigned to Track A. He was in school for 3 weeks and off the next 3 weeks. I didn't understand the logic concerning the track, but it allowed me more time to plan the next step. I never had an official place to live. I asked Aunt Vanessa if I could stay with her for a little while. She was not straight with me, but she commented, "I don't know about all that." I wasn't reading into her true feelings because I went by how close we used to be. I hadn't thought differently of her since. As a result, I was living in between both of my aunt's residences. As soon as I arrived, I searched for work with every lead I could find. I sent out my resumes and enlisted with the temporary agency, which started calling to offer 1-day or 2-day assignments. However, they would call the morning of and want me to report to work that same morning. Stable and permanent work was scarce. Aunt Vanessa thought I had my expectations set too high. She felt that I should consider changing my field of work and accept whatever job came my way, but I didn't want to change my career path. I accepted the short-term assignments because my funds were getting low. I did not have a lot of money to start with, but I believed that my family thought differently. I knew that I could always count on Saul if I had an emergency. On top of matters, I had no car and depended on another cousin to transport me back and forth to my assignments, which lasted for 2 weeks. Her husband wasn't having it since he was left out. He had a flirtatious spirit and an ulterior motive. Finally, I applied for unemployment, but my claim was denied because I had quit my job in Chicago. However, unemployment placed a condition on my situation. I had to work part-time consistently for 4 weeks to qualify for benefits. That became unattainable based on no job openings within the area. Things started looking hopeless because I was facing 2 dilemmas. I had no residence or car. Aunt Vanessa kept her cool and was waiting to see what my plans were, but she started insinuating that I needed to pay some rent. She didn't believe that I would have moved without having a stash of money. I was not used to her treating me this way because we had always been down for one another. She had changed a great deal after the divorce. She enjoyed partying and possessed a lustful spirit that caused her to talk loosely about sex. I could not see that in her behavior until I spent time around her. Now it was a part of her personality. She was candid about expressing her views and did not want to listen to my concerns or needs at this point. I knew that time was winding down for me to face up to where I was going with this move. The bouncing back and forth was becoming tiresome. My focus changed in my search for work. I needed to get a car. In between waiting for something permanent and stable to come along, I fell into a more confused state of mind. Paris would say things to motivate me not to give up, but I was losing my faith. Her mom couldn't offer me a place to live because she occupied a room on her in-laws' property. Their home was a group home for mentally ill patients. My Aunt Ernestine worked there, and she had Paris, the baby, and my uncle living there. I called Saul to explain that I needed a car and about my living situation. I expressed that things weren't looking good. He sent me money to buy a reliable beater. Still, I decided to wait because I was afraid of getting a lemon. I started thinking pessimistically. Paris got her car repaired, and we started hanging out. I met a few of her friends. I was impressed to meet some cool people who worked professional jobs that had lovely cribs. But as they say, birds of a feather flock together. Some of her friends were into drinking, alcohol, getting high, scheming, and cursing. We went clubbing a few times at Paradise 21, a club well known to attract celebrities. One evening, while we were hanging out at the club, Jodeci performed. I remember back in the day when Paris would call to tell me stories about whom she had met and what she was doing. She sounded very excited. I sometimes wondered about how differently my life would have been if I hadn't gotten married young. Paris was attending school part-time at the community college. When her school check arrived, she said, "Let's go to the mall." I was cool with that because I hadn't received any news regarding work. I felt like my life was going nowhere. My time wasn't being utilized correctly, and the weeks were passing by quickly. Yet, from my observation, she seemed to be functioning normally. At least, that's what I thought. Riding home from the mall, she confessed that she had stolen a pair of pants. I was in shock and didn't know what to say because she had just gotten a nice check. She acted like it didn't faze her. I could see the excitement in her eyes. She immediately conjured up another plan to go back the next day, telling me that she wanted to steal more merchandise. I tried to discourage her from doing it, but she asked me to keep the baby in case she got caught. I agreed because I knew that I wasn't going to steal anything. She shoplifted at the same store and got arrested by security. I saw my life heading for big trouble because I was hanging around a person I didn't understand and didn't know. I had never intended to move to California to become a thief or get a criminal record. I had credit cards and credit available to charge anything that I could afford within my means. I knew from my past where stealing had gotten Lionel. I often wondered how different his life would have turned out if he had listened to our grandparents. Again, I attempted to explain the scenario to Saul and complained that things were not working out and that I wanted to come home. He convinced me to stay because he was coming. The weather was getting cold and the season had changed. There were hardly any warm, sunny days like when we hung out by the pool. It was going on 6 weeks and things were not working according to my hopes. Saul gave me excuses about why I should stay because he was concerned about what his job would think if he reneged. Meanwhile, Aunt Vanessa was hammering me for rent. She felt that I was out and about having fun with Paris. I realized that the two of them were running buddies after her divorce. Let me correct that by saying they were partners in crime. They were into some wild things that I had not even dreamed of. I eventually paid her $50 to get off my back. I had my items stored at her place. I was mindful not to eat her food, and I contributed to helping with chores, the kids, and favors when she asked. I felt pressure from her that I wasn't able to give more. I had paid for all of her expenses whenever she wanted to visit me in Chicago. My mother had tried to warn me about her, saying that she was a user. It turned out that she was right. I needed a plan B at this point because plan A was not working at all. The thought of moving up north to Sacramento came to my mind. I had visited there to see my mom's side of the family a few years ago. It was my mom's sister, Shelley's daughter, and her children. I decided to give my cousin Tracy a call to see if I could stay with her for a short time because she had made the offer a few years ago when I visited her. I was upfront with her about my failure to find a job, and she welcomed me. I dragged JR out of school, and off we went on the Greyhound. When we arrived at the bus terminal, I could tell that things were not going to end well. I wanted to go back to Chicago. I could hear Saul telling me that things would be better here and to try it at least. I went through another ordeal, which turned out to be worse. Tracy had a one-bedroom apartment with a toddler. The apartment was small with little privacy that occupied the four of us. I knew that I did not have much time if I was going to make this work, so I started with a serious drive to find employment. I honestly didn't know my cousin as well as I thought. Occasionally, her boyfriend would stop by. I tried to give them their privacy, but I felt uncomfortable with all of the adjustments, so I wanted to exhaust myself by looking for work. Eventually, I fell into the routine of tagging along with Tracy and her boyfriend. The times that I wanted to stay at home, she would insist that I go. She had a kind spirit, spoke properly, and carried herself professionally, but I sensed another side to her. I believed that I had worn out my welcome when we started having disagreements and arguments. I felt bad because I started feeling like a burden. When I had first met Tracy's boyfriend, he was kind and friendly. He would make suggestions to her about doing fun things that included me. I thought he was cool, so I started having small conversations, just talking about Chicago and being friendly too. Her boyfriend would either smile or say something back as a joke, but Tracy did not like it. I realized it when her demeanor changed towards me. The fact that I was out there away from Saul, they started wondering about my situation. Tracy went to the extreme of setting me up with one of her boyfriend's friends. Her boyfriend picked us up one evening for dinner with his friend in the car. I was quiet and mannerable because I could tell that it was a setup. I wasn't tempted to commit adultery, though I knew about the consequences. Plus, I wasn't crazy, knowing that I could be blackmailed. We left dinner to go dancing at a nightclub. I danced with the guy, but that was all it was, a dance and dinner to me. This man started asking me questions about Saul and why did I move there. When the night ended, I wanted to get out of Tracy's apartment. My next move was to see if I could persuade Venus, Tracy's sister, to sympathize with me. She was open to my conversation, and I did not have to convince her that it was difficult living with Tracy. I asked if I could stay with her, and she kindly agreed. I knew it was my opportunity to leave Tracy's before we fell out. I stayed with Venus for approximately 3 weeks. She was expecting her second child and had a two-bedroom apartment. We got along because no men were hanging around or negativity, and we were good company to one another. I pursued finding my way around the city after enrolling JR into kindergarten and getting him off to school. Sometimes I would walk for miles to make it to my destination. One afternoon, on my way to pick JR up from school, I met Savannah. We spoke in passing, and for some reason, we had a small conversation while waiting outside for the bell. Our kids were in the same classroom, and we discovered that we both were from Detroit. We hit it off very well from that point, sharing our stories about what had brought us out to California. She said that her husband was in the military, and then we exchanged phone numbers. During my 2 weeks of living with Venus, I didn't feel the pressures I experienced with Aunt Vanessa and Tracy. I stayed focused and determined to search every day for work. I put in job applications all over the city and eventually got hired at the junior college. There was one small dilemma. I couldn't start work until January 4th due to the new budget's effective date. The wait was 6 weeks before I could start. I was happy about the news, but on the other hand, I was a sitting duck. I decided to be wise by not ending there with my job search. Tracy started calling Venus to stir up the pot by treating her mean because things were working out between us. Saul called Tracy's number looking for me. She insinuated terrible things about me. She came by to pick up Venus to take her grocery shopping, and I asked if I could go. Shortly after making 2 stops, we got into an argument. She stopped the car and put me out. She had it out for me. Venus turned on me after that incident. She depended on her sister and needed her help. Once again, my wheels were spinning in the wrong direction. I prayed and asked God to help me. I didn't want to give up at this point because I had felt that I could make it. Tracy gave me some mail that came to her address. which turned out to be a check from ITFC. I am sure that if she had known that it was a check, I would have never received it. I was planning to use the money for an apartment and a car. I started venting to my mother and explaining to her what was going on. She told me to go back home. She started getting uptight and using profanity. I regretted asking her for advice. I pawned my jewelry to get more cash and I prayed, knowing that more money could change my situation. Savannah and her family invited JR and me out for pizza. She asked if my family would be okay if I spent time with her family, and I replied yes. I thought my cousins could care less as long as I was not bothering them. On Thanksgiving, JR and I ate dinner with Savannah's family. When we returned home to Venus's that evening, I discovered that all of our things were missing. Tracy was calm when I asked what was going on. I pleaded and begged for answers regarding my things because I assumed that it was all a trick. Venus refused to talk to me about where my things were, so I got furious and ran out the door searching for a police officer. I waved at a passing police car and he stopped the vehicle to see what was wrong. He questioned Tracy and Venus about my things and their relationship with me. Venus kept quiet while Tracy did all the talking. The officer didn't like the way Tracy was talking, so he checked her and asked for permission to walk through the apartment. But of course, my things weren't there. I explained to the officer that I was from Chicago and relocated to be around my family. The police suggested that I take the matter to the small claims court if my cousins refused to return my things. I knew that could take months, and by that time, my thoughts would be far away from there. So I got on the phone and asked my mother to ask Aunt Shelley to talk to them. Aunt Shelley called immediately to intervene. She asked, why were they acting ugly? God don't like ugly, she said. Aunt Shelley had a sweet and peaceful spirit. She spoke slow and always greeted the family with a hug and kiss. Her favorite words were sugar or baby, how you doing with this big smile? However, Venus and Tracy were not hearing that mushy talk because they wanted to punish me. The more I became entangled in this web of deception, the more I realized that time was running out. Tracy told Aunt Shelley that she didn't like how I talked around her boyfriend and that I had a smart mouth. Saul finally called to find out why they were holding my things. They told him that I had been running the streets and hanging out, but he knew that wasn't my behavior. I was so frustrated from all the mind games. I was at the mercy of Savannah's help. I stayed with her at that point because I was no longer welcomed at Venus's. The phone calls went on for a day or two before things came to an end. Tracy stated that I owed her money for rent and a phone bill. I apologized and paid my debt in full in exchange for my things. I had to learn to walk in humility and patience while I endured another nightmare from the pit of hell. In conclusion, it was about money. I was mindful whenever I used any of my cousins' amenities, and I asked for their permission. I was aware of any expenses that I utilized. I was steaming with rage and anger about how I had been double-teamed. I knew that it was time to move on, and there was nothing that Saul could say to prolong my stay. I thank God for my meeting with Savannah, who had made sure that JR and I had a place to stay. A few days later, we packed, and I bought food for our departure. Savannah drove us to the bus station. When it came time to say goodbye, I expressed my gratitude with all my heart. God had sent her into my life to be that guardian angel until my steps became straight. I stared out the window while the bus drove off, anticipating the long journey as a time to reflect and sort things out in my mind. As I drifted far away inside, my thoughts became images that reflected the scenes in my life. God knew that I didn't know what to expect back in Chicago because I wasn't willing to accept my failures. I had so much on my mind, bridges to cross, and some sense of direction to regain. I even wondered if I still had a marriage waiting for me in Chicago. While I was away, I stayed in touch with Amaris, the only person I could share my faults and failures with. She always reminded me of the good and held me in high regard. We became closer friends through my troubles and struggles. I was in search of a new life, which I believed was out there somewhere. I wanted better for myself, and running away wasn't the answer. I had to consider the fact that I was a wife and mother. My poor son had been dragged across the country and had attended 4 different schools. We finally arrived in downtown Chicago 3 days later during the week of Christmas.